And we're live. Hey people, how are you doing? Welcome to the Sports Therapy Association podcast, episode 202. My name is Matt Phillips, creator of RunChatLive.com. And as always, this episode is being recorded live on the Sports Therapy Association YouTube channel and also on the Sports Therapy Association Facebook page. Before we begin, just a little shout out, if you are an STA member, we mentioned this last week, if you're an STA member who would like to be on the podcast, who would like to be on the Sports Therapy Association podcast, then listen up, because what you may not know, and some of you will know, that on the first Tuesday of every month, we do an Ask Us Anything episode with a panel made up of 4 or 5 STA members. And on the next episode, which is going to be Tuesday, July the 2nd at 8 o'clock, the topic is going to be therapy for swimmers. So if you are an STA member who works with swimmers and you like the idea of being on that panel, it's not a test. There'll be some questions, but it's all about just you sharing your knowledge, your experience, your ideas, all that sort of stuff. No real, well, there will be some wrong answers, but we'll make them. But it's just sharing experience. So if you like the idea of that, and even if you're kind of interested but not quite sure and need a little bit of a pep talk, then email me, matt@sta.co.uk. It's people who have done it and been on it, were nervous to start off, and then afterwards they said that was so great, pop my podcast cherry and I'm feeling good. And that's what they sang. And it really can help you in your career and your life and everything, because it's one of those things where you just overcome a little bit of fear. And it's also good in your CV. You can play little excerpts to your patients and clients. You can network more with other people who've been on the show and all that sort of stuff. So if you're interested, let me know. Okay, did I sell it well? I think so. I'm looking forward to those emails flocking in. If you're listening to the podcast and you'd like to join us live, then like I say, just head along to YouTube or the Facebook. People are coming through the door now. I'm just going to say good evening. If you do come in, then I can bring your message and your comments and questions up onto the screen. So, for example, Gary Benson, founder of the STA, just come in. I'm saying good evening all. Says Gary. Hey, Gary, how you doing? Good to see you in here. David Fetty says evening all. Hey, David, thanks for joining us. How are you? Muscle Mechanics has come for good name, strong name there. Muscle Mechanics. Good evening, all, says Muscle Mechanics. Good to see you, Muscle Mechanics. What's your real name? Well, unless that is your name, I'm not judging. But yeah, if you have got a name like that, and I do know you, and I'm just like, don't recognize your brand, then stick it in the comments so I know who's here. Anyway, talking of STA members, yes. As part of our recent 200th episode celebration a couple of weeks ago, we announced that we'll be giving away some free memberships. So thank you to everyone who entered the draw by commenting on our Facebook post. And congratulations to those who, by being picked from the hat, have won free STA membership. And those people are, and they've already been informed, Michelle Oliver, Scott Walker, Anne Roberts, and somebody called Julia Massage Therapy, which is a great name for a massage therapist. So well done to all of you for your free membership. Congratulations. Thanks for participating in the draw, everyone else. The discount celebrations do continue until July the 4th, fitting date. We have got 50% discounts up for grabs if you want to be part of the Sports Therapy Association. And again, I mean, it's to tell you the truth, I'm always telling Gary it's too cheap anyway, but we do keep the prices down because it's a non-profit association. We're not here to make a profit. We don't make a profit. We declare no profit because we don't make anything. It's all about providing support and helping the industry along. So it's already cheap, but if you like a bit of a discount, if that's what you need to come and discover all the benefits and advantages of being part of our wonderful group and community, then here's another chance. Are you ready? The first 20 therapists who sign up as new STA members using the code 200, so 200 as a code, will get 50% discount on annual membership. It's first come, first served. You heard it here first. Only 20 of them are available, and it must be claimed before July the 4th, 2024. I think I got that right. Is that okay, Gary? I think so. That's all good. Right then, got a bit of fog in my throat here tonight. Muscle Mechanics says, I'm Danny Matthews. Forgot I'm logged in from work long. Hey, Danny, good. I'd like to have a name there. Thanks for joining us, Danny. Good to see you in the live lounge. So we are continuing our 2-part episode on movement. In part 1 last week, which was episode 201. For those of you who missed it, it's available as always on your favorite podcast apps and also on YouTube if you'd like to see the glorious visual spectacle that it was. My guest was John Scriven, founder of Move Well. who's a natural movement and rehabilitation specialist. Some of you might know him from Therapy Expo. A wonderful guy, such knowledge. I mean, he was dropping all of these other names. I was like, John, just tell us the stuff yourself. You don't have to quote every single person you've studied with, but he's so learned. And he's got a massive passion for helping individuals achieve what he refers to as physical literacy. So a lot of it was about trying to restore or just checking whether the exercises which we tend to give out, because we're taught to give out, really do replicate what our clients need to do, whether that's for occupational movement of some form or just everyday movement, or maybe for their sport. And I know that there's going to be a nice segue and crossover in tonight's episode as well. So it's a great episode to have a listen to if you haven't done yet. And like I say, available on all popular podcast apps, including Spotify and Apple Podcasts and all that sort of stuff. And leading on very nicely from that, I'm very excited tonight to introduce Stephen King, who hasn't been on the show before. So it's always lovely to get people. I've known the name and seen the name and followed the posts for probably nearly a decade. And we were just chatting off air. It's just ridiculous how you can see someone's name and follow each other for so long and not actually say hi to each other, even in a virtual way. But it's happening finally. Stephen King is the founder of Movement Assessment Technologies, or MAT. Now you know what MAT stands for. And we're going to be having a look at that. We're going to look at different types of technologies, of which Stephen is very much involved in, and have a look at, in many of these cases, without giving too much away, how they can be useful in making sure that we are helping our clients actually get better at what they want and need to do. So strap yourself in, grab your pens and paper, those of you in the live lounge. Welcome, just a final few highs to Sir Glenn Murphy, MBE. I love sticking that up. That's the sort of class we get in here, you see, on the Sports Therapy Association podcast here in the UK. Sir Glenn Murphy, MBE. Thank you. Thank you, sir, for joining us. And Gary says, we've already had lots of interest, Matt. We've processed 3 of the winners today, and we've had 5 discounted memberships already taken. Right, so yeah, 5 are gone, 15 left. If you are listening live and you do want to join the STA, then now's the time to do it. 15 left. God, I feel like I'm on Twitter. Not Twitter. What's it called? That new one. Gone. Oh my God. Right. Anyway, enough dawdling around. Let's bring up the guest for tonight, Movement Assessment Technologies with Stephen King. Hey, Stephen. How you doing?
Hi, Matt. Hi, everyone. Fantastic name, Matt, as well. It's very on brand for today, which is very exciting. And I just want to say a big thank you to yourself, Gary, and obviously Scott for teeing this up. I'm really excited to be here this evening for you guys. Very, very early in the morning here for me. So I apologise. The coffee's just kicking in. I've managed to spill it all over myself already once this morning. So a couple of little accidents, but hopefully get through the rest of the podcast without any interruptions.
Thank you. Yeah, I should start off by saying thank you once again. Another expert from Australia. We don't know what it is, how you guys chuck out all these experts, but yeah, thank you very much for being up so early in Melbourne, aren't you? Is that right?
Correct.
Yeah. Which everyone in listening is thinking, oh, lucky so-and-so, he's sitting in the sun bathing in the luxury of Australia, but actually it's pretty chilly over there. And he's actually wearing like a sweat top at the moment. So
yeah, we're at 0 degrees and it's pitch black still. So yeah, I feel like I'm in the UK, so it's probably quite appropriate for this show this evening.
Yes, that's us, pitch black and 0 degrees. That's us, as well. Right, so great. Like I say, great to finally be able to spend some time with you. I think we'll jump straight into it, really. For people who aren't aware of you, the kind of name, the website tells us all about it. The MAT standing for Movement Assessment Technologies. I love how, let's bring up a little shot of your website just so people who have joined us live have got that visual input, which they're here for. Here we go. You ready, people? Bathe in this. So, yeah, we're talking about matassessment.com, isn't it? It's matassessment.com. Yeah, matassessment.com. MAT assessment.com. So Movement Assessment Technologies. Fantastic website. There's so much information on there, as with all my guests. Fantastic website to have a look at. And I love this bit because it seems to be your, not catchphrase, that devalues it, but your tagline, that's it, is if you're not measuring while assessing, you're guessing. And I've seen that a lot around on your social media. And it's explain why you like that so much and how that kind of fits in with what you do.
Look, I think a big part of it is, a lot of people have got, there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of grey area in what we do. And I think, what I've learned over the last sort of 15 years or so, starting to incorporate, more data driven assessments into my practice is, it really does help to take away some of that guesswork with the people that you're working with. And hopefully we can get some better long-term and life-changing outcomes to the people we work with. So, yeah, it's been something we've had since day one. We sort of finally got the trademark through actually officially this morning, which is nice on that too here. So that's a big thing as well. So it's probably appropriate you sort of brought that up first thing today.
That's cool. And it's a pretty serious thing, isn't it? Because we a lot of us physios as well. I'm not just going to say sports therapists. I think in a lot of careers we're taught to kind of evaluate things with our eyes. Not only are we kind of measuring bony structures, which we know all about, the kind of different shapes and variabilities, but also we're looking at it with our eyes and our thumbs and thinking, yeah, that's definitely changed a couple of degrees. Good, we're getting better now. And it's limited, isn't it? There's a lot of problems with that, I guess.
There's a lot of problems, I think. And, that's probably, what started me on this journey, 15 years ago or so. Look, my background, I sort of graduated as an osteopath first. So I went through the 3 years bachelor, 2 years master's program here in Melbourne and Australia in that. And I came out into practice. And, for me, I had a lot of confidence coming out. I'd been told, we've done 5 years. It's more than physio. We've got the masters. We can call yourself doctors. We're better than everyone else, and came out with a lot of confidence. And then quickly I realised it probably wasn't the case. And I really struggled. I worked as a personal trainer through my osteopathy course. I really struggled to take those people who I was treating on the table and get them moving, and take those people who I was sort of training and get them on the table. So for me, there was a bit of a disconnect there. So I sort of decided I needed to try and sort of upskill myself further. And, it took a big journey to get there and to start to remove some of that uncertainty. But I definitely sort of, feel that I've got there 15 years later or so, collecting some data. And it just helps you feel more confident with the uncertainty. And I really remember one specific client where, I was probably, my confidence was at the all-time low. We're talking about that Dunning-Kruger effect. You come out, you're really confident, and then all of a sudden you get right down to the bottom of that sort of Dunning-Kruger curve. And it was a guy who came with a hamstring strain. And so he sort of hobbled in, Australian rules footballer, real football, sort of came in, and he, he sort of said, I've got some pain in my hamstring. So I pushed on his leg, with all the assessment skills I had at the time, and it was a little bit weak. I sort of had a look at his straight leg raise and his range of motion through that hamstring, and it was a bit reduced. And I got in there with my hands and had a bit of a feel around, as therapists we often pride ourselves on doing, and it was pretty tender and painful. And so I thought, look, I know exactly what this is. It's a grade 1 hamstring strain. So I did, what I was taught in my osteopathy course. I did some, some treatments. I got in there, did some soft tissue, did some muscle energy to the leg lengths and the pelvic imbalances into the muscle itself. I might have even done some dry needling back then as well. And then I gave him a few exercises. And we did that, a few times over the next 3 or 4 weeks. And, he got back 4 weeks later. He's feeling good. He could run. He could train. He had full range of motion. I pushed on his leg. It was pretty strong. And he sort of got in there and had a feel of the tissues, and there was no pain or discomfort. And so I thought, okay, look, you're good to go back to sport. What happened 4 weeks later, Matt?
Oh, suspense, dramatic pause. He's hurting again. let me guess.
He hobbles back in and he goes, I've sort of got this pain in the hamstring again. So I pushed on it again. It was a little bit weaker again. I sort of got in there, had a feel it was quite tender, and his range of motion was reduced. And for me, I thought, I didn't balance out that pelvis well. It was my treatment techniques weren't good enough. And so I got in there, I did more treatment. I gave him more exercises. And again, 3 or 4 weeks later, full range, pushed on his leg, it was strong, and it was no longer tender. And I sent him back onto the sports field. 6 weeks later, he comes back in and he's done his ACL. And so for me, I was at that real low point. So I decided to add another $30,000 worth of debt to my sort of study debt here in Australia, and went back and did my master's in physiotherapy, and hoping that would bridge the gap a little bit to get those people off the table and get them moving again. But, what I learned a lot about myself, a lot about communication, and lucky enough to do a lot of pain science stuff with, Dave Butler and Lauren Mosley and those guys over there at UniSA. But we did 1 2-hour Pilates class of exercise prescription in the whole physiotherapy course. Look, most of it was sort of, getting patients up out of the hospital bed and walking them 20 meters and taking them back to the bed. So it really didn't help, what I sort of wanted it to do and bridge that gap. So I sort of started traveling the world. I came to the UK, did some great courses over there, went over to the USA and did some great sort of functional movement stuff, and thought, look, I'm doing some good stuff here, but how do we actually know if people are getting, good results and they're actually heading back towards their goals? And that's where I was talking to some people, some other business owner friends that I had, they're sort of accountants, they're lawyers, they're video production companies. So a few of my close mates who, by that stage, I'm getting pretty old, a few grey hairs are starting to come in. They've all got their businesses. And the one thing that they kept telling me and how they sort of evaluated the outcomes in their business was through data. And it was just one thing at the time, going back, 12 years ago or so, wasn't really considered in the healthcare space. So a little bit different today, thankfully. Over the last sort of 10 years or so I've been doing this, it's changed a lot. But at the time, no one was really talking about data. And as I was saying to you before we came on air, we were sort of put out there as a bit of outcast, I guess, early on in our journey, where people are like, what's this stuff? You don't need numbers in healthcare. So yeah, it's been an interesting journey.
That's really interesting. Thank you for that insight. It's going to be really interesting for listeners to hear that even as an osteopath, who we don't sit up quite as high as physios, obviously not in the heavens, but we put them higher than us, humble kind of sports therapists. But even an osteopath wasn't satisfied and not getting results. And what you did with this patient will mimic what a lot of people listening will go, well, that's exactly what I would have done. Maybe I should call myself an osteopath. You can't. But then you went and did physiotherapy, which in theory should have solved it all. And it didn't. You ended up with even more questions. So it's really healthy, because that's a common theme here of always thinking that the next career is the one that's going to give you all the answers and the grass is greener, but it's kind of not, is it? So no, really healthy to hear that. No, I appreciate that. Yeah. And the measuring thing, the data thing, it's very true. And I'm really excited to hear about some of the tools you've come up with and how they kind of do help you get results. I wonder whether sometimes people worry. I found this with gait analysis years ago, when you were collecting data and the stuff you think was supposed to be happening wasn't actually happening. You were like, no, I can't show this to my client. He's feeling better and it shouldn't have worked according to this data. So I think sometimes, especially when we're doing stuff which isn't actually evidence informed, the data can be our enemy. You're almost crossing your fingers thinking, please show that his cadence has increased. Please show it, and it hasn't. And you're like, oh, what's happened here was. So I think as we'll see with you now, it's great collecting data as long as you're linking that with the evidence, because otherwise the data could really show that what you're doing is not giving you the desired outcome, should we say.
Yeah, definitely. Look, it's always going to come back to the individual's needs, wants, and goals, and I think that's the big thing. And if you start with that in mind, and you use the assessments along the way, of all the different capacities that someone needs to achieve those goals, look, hopefully we can do a better job. And I'm pretty confident to say now, look, we can't prevent injuries or predict who's going to necessarily go on and sustain an injury. We can get some better information around it. And I think with that hamstring, the AFL player with that hamstring example, I think if I was seeing him today, potentially he doesn't go on to sustain that non-contact ACL injury, if my assessment had been a bit better. But as you said, look, these problems are right around. I think everybody, I've noticed traveling around the world, I think we've taught in over 30 countries now. And I've had people from over 15 different professions attend the course over the years. And everybody's sort of got the same sort of issues. And, for me, I think the best thing about incorporating data into practice is it means there's no right or wrong way to go about getting someone back to those goals. There's literally a million different ways that you can go about treating or training someone to get a great long-term outcome for them. It's just about making sure that you've got good data to know that you're actually making progress. And gait example is a really good one. Look, I think everyone who works with runners, look, that's often, the first place that they'll start. But for me, that's, used to be where I used to start with the runners, but that's probably the last thing that I start to do now, because without having the information around all the different capacities that they need, you're really just making sort of assumptions and guessing, if you see something on their running analysis, that why that's happening. And for me, if you've assessed their other movement patterns, you've looked at their balance and proprioception, their speed and agility, you've tested out their strength and their power, their endurance, their flexibility, all the muscle capacities, then hopefully you get there and you start to see something which doesn't look quite right. You can start to bring the whole picture together. And I think that's the beauty of data, and also brings that research and that evidence into practice, which I think a lot of us talk about being evidence informed or evidence sort of based in practice, but a lot of the time we're not using the assessments they use in the research in practice, and the types of technology and stuff that they use to make these decisions in the research in practice as well. And that's something I've been a big advocate of for a long time, is how can we actually start to bring some technology into practice and collect data which is meaningful. A lot of these systems out there that you can bring into practice will give you lots of different metrics out there, and you can get a bit of paralysis by analysis. We're all time poor, so it's really trying to find the one or two key metrics which are actually meaningful for that patient and achieving their goals.
Brilliant. Love it. I'm listening to you thinking I'm so excited to bring out some of the products now, especially the main one. Well, I don't know if it's the main one, but the one which I'm going to start off with. And hopefully you'll be able to use the mat as an example of everything you said kind of there to put it into some kind of context. So let's bring up, we'll start off with the mat if that's okay. I've got some images here just for you image thirsty people in YouTube here. So the mat as it sounds, I mean, for people who are listening to the podcast, they won't be able to see this image, so you can talk us through it as well. But there's a little image of the mat and as one of somebody using it. People in clinic may well have used something similar, but yeah, talk us through what is the mat and how it links up with the whole mat approach, if you could, Stephen.
Yeah, sure. Look, the mat's the movement assessment tool. So sort of pretty creative name. It's also a mat on the ground. So it sort of worked pretty well. I sort of gave myself the rest of the afternoon off when I came up with that. I was pretty all tied in pretty nicely together. But look, for me, I had no intentions of, running courses or, selling this product around the world to other people. For me, at the time, I was starting to do some of that functional movement training and starting to bring some data into practice. And for me, I was working in a little treatment room at the time. It was probably no wider than probably 2.5 meters by 3 meters. With a treatment table in there, you couldn't do all three-dimensional movements. So I wanted a way to be able to sort of perform a lot of different movements, those triplane lunges, my favorite test, the star excursion balance test, all those great three-dimensional sort of data-driven type assessments in a small space, and also be able to do it when I went out and worked with the sports teams I was working with. I was sick of, putting tape on the ground and, each time I went down to the sports club and draw the numbers on it, spend, 15 minutes doing that, when I should actually be doing some meaningful stuff with the athletes I was working with. So for me, it was just a necessity. And I started, sort of putting a few pictures on social media back in the glory days where you'd put one picture up and you'd probably hit 100,000 people or so organically. It was pretty nice. And a few of my colleagues and close friends said, "Oh, can you teach us, how to use this? We're pretty interested." And at this time, it was literally a yoga mat with some markings on it. So I hadn't even created a, official sort of product yet. And so I ran that first course with them, and I sort of made up a few of those different products for them. And, it went really well. I think we had 10 people. So I thought, look, maybe I can start to produce this. And so I went into sort of, trying to work out ways to go down the manufacturing path, which for me, as a physio and osteo, was something I had no idea about where to start. So we ended up getting there, and then I think, over the next 12 months, I ended up running about 10 courses around Australia. So a few in Melbourne, a few told their colleagues interstate. And then it wasn't until probably 18 months later when we got a call from, or an email from a guy in Hong Kong who sort of said, "Hey, we're really interested in this approach. Would you be keen to bring it over?" And that's when I started to see, look, it wasn't just a problem that I was having in my own practice and, that uncertainty, but it was actually a problem sort of elsewhere. And we got over there. I think we had 40 people in the first course in Hong Kong and Taiwan. So they were really sort of popular. And then I think over the next sort of 12 months or so, we ran courses in about 25 different locations. So it grew pretty organically from something which, was a pretty simple tool, which was for me just designed to give me data around all three planes of motion. And be able to quantify all those. So it allows you to measure the distance in multiple different ways along the mat. It allows you to measure the angulation using the sort of star on the mat. And then you've got the mat ruler, which allows you to measure the verticality. So, if I was to assess someone here in Melbourne, they say they've got some, some back pain when they bend down and pick up something to the left, I can put them into that position. And I can sort of have them reach down, and I can get a number on that angulation. I can get a number on that distance, and I can get a number on that verticality of where their pain comes on. Often you can quantify that as well. They might say 5 out of 10 pain. And so if they're jumping on a plane and they come over and see you, Matt, then, you can hopefully with the mat put them in that same position and know whether they've got, better or worse over that sort of period of time. So it really just allows a quick, simple way to collect data. And for me, that's the best data you can collect. It's got to be, quick, simple and easy to do, not take too much time. And, it's got to be affordable as well. A lot of the technology we bring into practice, we're not charging huge amounts in the healthcare industry. It's got to be viable to implement into your business as well. And that's also been a big philosophy that I've tried to keep, through the development of, I think it's over 20 different products now for the healthcare space is, making them affordable. So you can put one, not just one into the business, but one into every room in the business. So every patient, every client can get access. Yeah.
So let's continue with your, I mean, you were examining somebody with back pain. What is the advantage of therapists being able to note down that particular distance they've managed to travel to touch, or the angle, or what's the advantage of that?
Yeah, so I guess it probably comes down to some of the issues that I had early in my career, where look, you'd have your back pain patient, you ask them to bend forward, and they go, that hurts. And so, okay, there's pain on, bending forward or onto flexion. And so you get down the treatment, you do your great treatment. They get back up again and they bend forward and they go, that hurts. And so I'm thinking, I've got 2 minutes left on here. They don't feel any better. But actually, what I've probably learned over the time and as I've started to collect this data is we're probably actually making some meaningful changes in their range of motion. It was just that I wasn't able to show myself, firstly, to help my clinical reasoning that was the case. But secondly, most importantly, I wasn't able to show the patient that was the case as well. And especially with some of those, chronic back pain patients, little wins along the way are really important in, driving that change, improving their confidence, and trying to improve their adherence to doing the stuff outside the room, which is the most important thing as well. So there's numerous benefits to collecting data. And, when I first started collecting, as I said, I created the MAT, and this data-driven approach, for myself. But what I've learned over the last, 12 to 15 years is it's actually more important for the people that we're working with. So we can sort of show them that progress over time. And as I said, bring some of that sort of evidence and science into practice.
So your person's come off the couch and they've gone into forward flexion and it's hurtful. You're saying with the mat, you might be able to direct them visually to a slightly different angle, which maybe they couldn't do before. And so rather than just a black and white, does it hurt or not, you can move them through a different kind of range and see what improvements have occurred. Yeah.
100% different angles, or you might just see, look, they've been forward, but they can actually get another 5 or 10 centimeters forward. So you actually have made a change, or maybe you haven't. Look, and that happens quite a lot as well. It also means next time when you go back and do your next session with them, you're not going to go ahead and do the same thing. So it helps your clinical reasoning in that regard too. And look, the big issue that I see, especially from my osteopathic background, is people will get patients and clients onto the table and they'll do 5, they'll do 10 treatment techniques and they'll get them back up. And if you ask them to bend forward and they're still painful, you've got 2 minutes left. What do you do? Or even worse, they've improved a lot. Next time they come in, you've got to do all those 5 to 10 treatment techniques again, where really it might have just been the first thing you did with them that was actually the thing that got them better. But you don't know, so by bringing those little bits of data in, that continual reassessment with data throughout your sort of treatment and training process, whether that's within the session or over days, weeks, months, or years, it can really help you, narrow down the key thing, which is helping that individual get back closer to their goals.
Sounds good. And does having like a visual input help the client rather than just saying point out with your foot as far as you can, having them something to actually aim for?
Yeah, so look, definitely there's components, and we've changed the mat a lot in regards to that over the last 10 years or so. I think we're on to our 8th or 9th sort of iteration, not including the prototypes that we created. And the reason is to make it a little bit more visual, to enhance communication with our patients and clients. I think that's the biggest thing to help with workflow and stuff. So you'll see now there's lots of bright colors on there for different sort of tests and that sort of thing, and it really does help sort of streamline the workflow and give them, as you said, some targets or some visualizations which make it a little bit easier to perform those assessments and speed it up as well. The biggest complaint I hear about doing more assessment in practice is that it takes too long. For me, if you haven't got time for assessment, you haven't got time for treatment or training. There's a lot of the time, if you spend a lot of time time on assessment and collecting some data, it's going to really speed up a lot of that treatment and training process to the meaningful stuff, which is actually going to get people hopefully back close to their goals.
Fantastic. It all sounds great. I like the simplicity of it. I like the idea of it will help improve inter and intra-rater reliability. Like you said, I love the idea of somebody going to another therapist you might be working with if they're traveling, and then you can reproduce that to the exact position. Can you do it now? Yeah, I can still do it. Can I not? Or something's changed. That's I didn't think of that. That's a really nice idea.
So data helps us communicate, better with our patients, but also, better with ourselves and our notes, but also allows us as, those 15 different professions who attended our courses to speak the same language as well. If you're talking to, medical professions, it's often, if you're, sending a letter back to a doctor or something like that, being able to say, oh, they can now bend forward 10 centimeters further than they could is a lot more sort of meaningful than saying,
cool.
there's still pain on, bending.
Getting a bit of language. I like it. You mentioned on the website as well, I like this, you can bridge the gap between traditional assessment methods and the functional movements that are performed by your patients every day. So this is something which will resonate with people who listened to John Scriven last week, where he was suggesting that a lot of the assessments and the exercises we give out afterwards are not really replicating. They might have their place early on, maybe in the rehab ladder, but they're not ultimately replicating what that person's going to need to do. So how does your mat, for example, help bridge that gap? What are you referring to?
Yeah, so look, for us, it comes down to, the different components. And, a big framework that I love is, one that was actually first talked about back in 2009 by Ryman and Mance, which was that functional performance testing spectrum, where they talk about, bringing assessment in all three planes of motion, collecting, qualitative and quantitative data, around the things that people need, want, and love to do. And so, they talk about looking at all the different movement patterns, so we're going to assess that. We talk about balance and proprioception. We talk about speed and agility, that sort of fitness capacity, which I think as therapists, we don't tend to do, necessarily as well, that anaerobic and aerobic capacity. And then those muscle, components, the strength, the endurance, the power, the flexibility. And so I think if you can assess all of those different things, and know what that individual's goals are, hopefully you can take people a little bit further from that traditional assessment. And for me, look, the traditional assessments, still have their place. There's still, things that have made people great therapists to this point in time, you're still going to do. But there's a big gap from, like that hamstring example, pushing on that leg or looking at that flexibility on the table and actually getting someone up and running at, full speed like that AFL footballer would have done, running 25, kilometers an hour, changing direction at speed, with trying to bend down and grab a ball, potentially. So, we need to try and take our assessment further. And a lot of the times, especially with modern technology, we can actually start to quantify some of these things in those, whether it's the occupational tasks, their recreational tasks, or their sports tasks. We've got lots of wearables, we've got lots of video sensors and capacity, video sort of sensor, or AI, even AI-driven sort of video analysis apps. So we can start to take people further along that. And so, whether we can actually fully reproduce the things, as part of our assessment, it can be challenging, but I think we can do a lot better than what we're doing now. And getting people, off the table is probably the first, step in that process for a lot of people.
Fantastic. Tools like the mat encourage you, remind you to do that. Let's get them doing something rather than just lying down. Let's get them moving around. Can you think of an example? I mean, I'm putting you a little bit on the spot here, but I imagine you've used the mat a few times. So is there anything which comes to mind where you thought, oh yeah, this mat is really coming to its own now. This is really helping this person or helping the outcome?
Oh, look, there's, hundreds of times over the last, 1,000 times over the last, last 10 years or so. Look, probably a good example was a young basketball player who came into me when I think she was 12 or 13 at the time. And so she'd had 6 ankle sprains in 6 months playing basketball. And so for me, I sort of, I had a look at her, at some of the assessments. So I started using the mat and I looked at her weight bearing sort of lunge test, her ankle, sort of weight bearing ankle range of motion test. And she was quite symmetrical between sides and she was above the norms for, her age group and sort of population. So I thought, that looks pretty good. I had a look at my favorite test, the static excursion balance test. And on all the reaches, she was reaching symmetrical, so within a couple of centimeters on each side. And she was well above norms for her population. And so I then had a look at her strength and capacity. And her strength, she could do, 30 plus calf raises on one leg, which is pretty rare at that age, really well. And so I'm sort of there scratching my head. I'm like, oh, shit, I don't know what's going on with this individual. And so then her mother said, oh, she wears orthotics, like insoles in her shoes. And I thought, oh, no, my history should have been a little bit better. I probably should have known that information. But, what I did there is I then, I'd had her baseline data, but then I took those insoles out of her shoe and I put them on the ground. And her weight bearing lunge, I think, went from 14 and 14 to 14 and 10 or something like that on the side that she had her ankle sprains with the orthotics in. Mm-hmm. I then had her perform the reach in all those different directions. And she went from pretty symmetrical side to side to falling outside that 4 centimeter cutoff point that we usually sort of, want people to be less than on all the reaches. And she actually got to that lateral reach on the static excursion balance test. And she rolled her ankle there in the room, which, wasn't bad. It wasn't a bad result. But automatically it sort of started to help my clinical reasoning. I then put them back in her shoes and she got worse again. on both the weight bearing lunge test and on the static excursion balance test. I then took out the orthotics from her shoes and just assessed her in her footwear, and she was the best she'd been yet. And so for me, from a clinical reasoning point of view, what do you think I did, Matt?
No, don't.
And treatment point of view, what did I do?
No, you keep going. Don't want to hear me. Don't want to hear
you. all I did, I took those orthotics and I literally threw them in the bin.
Oh, wow.
And her mother had just spent $1,000 on them. Was sort of like, you can't do that. I paid a lot of money, and I said, look, you're gonna pay me a lot more money if you keep those in there, because she's testing really well and everything else. And that's probably 10 years later now. She's represented her state level in basketball, and touch wood, she hasn't had another ankle sprain since. So a lot of the time, she was given orthotics, based off a traditional assessment because she had, flat feet. But for her, actually, the worst thing that she could have done was put her in those, because it was really driving her into that sort of inversion forces when she was sort of moving, and robbing her range of motion and creating a lot of that dysfunction there. So that's where that sort of retest process and, simple data, a couple of simple tests that take, 30 seconds or so, 30 seconds to 2 minutes to perform, can have a really meaningful change and, hopefully a life-changing impact on that person.
That's really cool. And I guess the advantage of the mat is the reproducibility of it, because you're getting to do you're changing one of the factors, for example, with or without orthotic device, but everything else is staying the same because it's reaching the same way, and you can really level, decide whether the intervention has made a difference or not. So that's really cool. That's a good example. And I also like the way the other lesson, which hopefully people picked up on, you thought yourself, oh geez, my subjective should have been a little bit more, I should have known about that orthotic, which we all still do, it's for whatever reason. And that's good. Good. And if you forget things like that, that makes everyone else feel a little better as well. So it's good to hear that. Okay, well, look,
definitely done that once or twice.
Let's have a look at, so we talked about the mat. That's great. And hopefully people can visualize it. If you listen to the podcast and you want to see the mat, then just head over to YouTube and check out episode 202, and you'll see some of the screenshots of what it is. I mean, it's how much is it? Can I say how much is it? Because you mentioned it's accessible and.
Yeah, I think it's about probably £120 or something like that, I think, off the top of my head. I've got to do the currency conversion rates, but probably something like that. Yeah, so usually, 1 or 2 patients fit forever, and it's something that literally you buy it once, you never have to use it again. Unfortunately, we probably manufactured it too well in that, I don't think we've ever had someone come back and need to buy a second to replace it, which is unfortunate, which is probably not a great business model. But, the durability, I've still got our first one, which is almost 10 years old now, which is still holding up, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. So 3 clients or something, depending on what you're charging. But and you've got something which you'll learn from as well, because it's interesting as well. And from listening to you, it's not just the mat, it's how you use it. It's the mat approach. So, and it seems to me that you use the mat, and we'll look at some other tools soon, as a way of kind of educating people on all the other things you've talked about. The mat is the focal point, but this is why we're using the mat this way, because of this and this and the limitations of this and the evidence. So I get it. I get how it's clever. You're using, like the website said, like it said on the tin, you're kind of collecting data, but following the evidence and the research. That's nice. Okay, I'm excited. Let's look at some other products. I'm going to, again, for those of you in the live lounge, let's bring up someone else here. I'm going to show this in the stream instead. So again, this is straight from the website. I'm just bringing it up for you guys in the live lounge so you can see it. It shows some of the other products which are available, and I'm sure there's going to be a linking theme with all of these. We looked at the mat just on the screen so people can see. We're also going to have a quick look now at the muscle meter, the MegaMat, the HopMat. We won't have time to go through the run gait analysis, but there's also gait analysis devices and things there as well. But let's go to the muscle meter, because we've talked a few times about measuring force output and stuff like that with various people. With Dr. Claire Minshaw, we talked about it, the advantages, the disadvantages. I think Peter Maliaras talked about it as well, with the limitations when you are trying to measure the forces, for example, in throwing a baseball or something. Are you really going to create or measure those forces? So I'm interested about this, the muscle meter. Tell us about it.
Yeah, look, this is one of our newest tools, I guess. I think we launched it, last August, so about 9 months ago or so. And it's been a huge success. I think a lot of people, it's a lot different to my journey probably 10 years ago launching the mat, where nobody really knew what it was. Nobody was really thinking about or collecting data. Whereas now I think a lot of people, realize they, should be, using these types of tools to get some, simple, accurate information. Go back to that hamstring example. It's probably the easiest way to keep going again. Again, something simple as being able to test his hamstring strength in 3 or 4 different positions, like you can with something simple like the muscle meter. Again, I think I probably could have made some better decisions than just manually push on his leg and saying, oh, look, that feels pretty strong. So, and the good thing is, like, using these types of technology, especially if you pair it up, with our measures app, you do get, comparisons in there around, some of the norms. And I hate that word, sort of that normative data, but, for me, it's sort of reference data. There's no normal patient that comes in, and a lot of the research that we see in the best data we have at the minute is from elite sports populations or university students. Typically is where a lot of the research is done, but we get still some reference or guidance data, I guess, to know where someone is compared to people of similar ages and heights and weights and that sort of stuff, and we can start to compare really easily. So it just enhances the decision making and starts to bring, as I said, bring that research into practice, and in a consumable way that not only communicate and help your decision making, but most importantly, communicate it to the people that you're sort of working with and help them sort of buy into the process, which is going to be the thing that gets them a great long-term outcome. So, the muscle meter is a quick, simple tool that you can measure both pushing and pulling type forces with. So it's 2 devices in one. As I said, it retails for around, I think, £200. It might even be a little bit under that, I think, under £200. So it's easily the most affordable device in the market. And there's now big software release. Actually, the Android's just gone live overnight, which is exciting, in the iOS yesterday. But there's 3 different testing modes now built in there as well, where you can get your peak and average force in there with the app. You can get endurance force, so you can measure force over a period of time, and you can also get your time to peak and your rate of force development. So there's over 150 different assessments you can perform with it, with your patients and clients, to get some some meaningful and, most importantly, some actual data. If you're going to collect data in practice, you've got to do something with it. And that's probably the biggest mistake I see with people, implementing data into practice and collecting data, is they collect lots and lots of data, but they don't then go and do anything with it. And so for me, if you're going to spend time, in assessment, it's got to be something that it's going to change what you do, and you're going to action something off the back of.
Very cool. I like the way and admire the way, and I knew you were going to do it because I followed you for a while, but I like the way you're quick to remind people that, we use norms, but it is as a reference, and you will have patients who will fall outside of these norms. And a lot of the studies are done with different populations. So it's really cool. But it's also nice that you're not I'm always complaining and whinging about social media, but a lot of the kind of pendulum swings totally other way, like, oh, there's no such thing as norms, therefore don't do any data collection. Just go with the individual in front of you. And suddenly it's like, well, no, you didn't have to throw that baby quite as far out with everything else. You could have just said, let's just collect the data, but not jump the gun and go, look at a red herring or something. So it's healthy. It's staying in a nice place in the middle where you're not kind of like throwing everything out just because it's not as relevant as you once thought. So it's cool. It's cool to hear.
I learned that the hard way, I think, early on. I think 10 years ago, I think when we first launched the mat, we had, I think, obviously probably one of the biggest social media, influencers out there, Meeks, sort of, called us out there, like he tends to do early on.
Is it really?
And, for using that term normative data. And for us, terminology, people tend to look too much into stuff. And I think he thought, look, here's another FMS, like someone looking to do a generic sort of, screen, which is probably as far away from what we could do, from what we actually do, as possible. But someone sees one thing on social media and decides to jump in there and, say a few comments. But I think that the pendulum sort of, swung the full other direction when I launched another technology company previously that I sold a few years ago, sort of, selling some similar sort of force measuring devices. And the first person who reached out to me on social media to purchase it was.
Go on. Oh, yeah, I can guess.
Meeks, yeah. So that was a nice moment where sort of, it sort of swung, and, it's maybe we're a little bit ahead of the curve, back then, but it's nice to see, that lots of people are starting to collect this data, and it is, transforming. And we've had lots of conversations since then, and we've got a lot more similarities than disagreements.
Oh, as always. Yeah, really that's cool. Great. It's cool. Fantastic. Okay. Well, look, I'm going to pop to the next one, if that's all right. Let's have a look what else we got on the list. The next thing here was called the MegaMat, was it?
That's the MegaMat.
Yeah. So tell us about the MegaMat.
Basically big sort of 2x2 centimeter. It's similar to the mat. You're just able to move in all 3 dimensions in a more functional way. So for me, look, the mat's a better assessment tool because you can really standardize the processes a little bit better. But the MegaMat you can use as an assessment tool, but it's a great sort of general training tool, and especially sort of bringing in some of that which I'm sure you probably talked about on the tendon stuff a little bit, some of that neuroplastic training with some of the reactive elements and that sort of stuff in there. So some cognitive driven training. And for me, when I'm prescribing exercises to my patients and clients, look, there's always got to be an end goal to it. I don't want someone to be able to sit there doing their exercise on their phone. We're not going to get those meaningful neuroplastic changes. I want to make sure there's a specific end goal or end direction they need to reach for. There's a specific sort of load that they've got to be moving, or there's a specific sort of focus they've got to have. The more we can sort of get them cognitively involved in the process, I think, the better changes and often quicker changes we can get. So the MegaMat's just a tool that, can allow you to do that, and pairs up really nicely with lots of other exercise equipment you've got. The only issue is it does require a lot of space.
Oh, is it that? Yeah, I guess you're getting people to lunge out quite far. Yeah. What are we talking there? I can't see from how big is it then? That's not the...
It's 2x2.
Oh, okay. Yeah, right. Okay. But yeah, no, great. For people who are trying to envisage it, just imagine, I mean, if you didn't have that, I always used to, when I was starting out, use like the idea of a clock, and you tell people, okay, point to 12 o'clock, go around to 1. Here you've actually got the numbers and the angles, and you've also got depth and distance and all sorts of things you measure. But I'm glad you pointed out the kind of like the cognitive stuff, the neuroplastic stuff, because you can like give people directions now, shout at them, scream, get them to change direction quickly, look for the number and get the brain involved and the visual input and everything. So it's quite exciting. I'm interested to hear, in your experience, are there some clients you are more likely to use these sort of tools with, and some clients you go, right, this client, no, I'm not even going to get it out? And if so, what kind of changes that decision?
Look, there's for instance, talking about a Measures app, there's over 800 different assessments in there. So look, there's always something you can start to utilize with your patient, and you don't necessarily, always, need the tools to be able to perform it. There's lots of other ways. For instance, you can get strength data. Simple, rep max testing with a dumbbell or something like that. Still a really nice way to get some, strength, or even without, strength endurance without it, without any weight. Things like, your single leg sit to stands, or your, single leg wall sits or something like that. There's always ways along the spectrum to get information. And it's just about getting creative. And as I said, look, in the Measures app, we've got 22 different capacities that you can go and assess. And there's 5 different sort of strength capacities in there. So, there's lots of different assessments you can perform without needing any equipment at all to get meaningful data. And as I said, the quick, simple, easy, and affordable assessments are the most important things. I see a lot of people, making the mistake of rushing out and, they see, the shiny force plates. And look, I've been part of creating a number of different force plates. And I think 15 years ago, I was probably the first person, in Australia to bring them into, clinical practice here. And, for me, the biggest mistake I see is people see this shiny stuff and they go and do all these different assessments of, jumping or double leg squats. They don't know anything about their strength capacity. They don't know anything about their range of motion. All they're purely looking at is some of that information, and lots of information and data off those types of technologies. So for me, that's the last stuff that you do. For me, you need to know all that information before you start to look at that. The only thing I see people do a lot is, they often use double leg assessment, probably too much in my opinion as well, especially without having the context around the individual muscle strengths and imbalances and those types of things. You're really just making assumptions, because you'll often see that people, when they go to jump, they'll end up putting, say 60 or 65% more weight through one leg, or generate power, 65% quicker on that side. Often you'll see that'll be the weaker side though. And so I see a lot of people who come into my practice who, they told me I've got a weak, right leg because I keep sort of shifty across that way when or I keep sort of shifty away from that side when I squat. When actually you start to test out their strength, it's exactly the opposite. And so people have been reinforcing that. And so if you're not building that whole picture, you're not looking at all those different capacities we mentioned earlier, you're not looking at all 3 planes of motion with them, you're really just guessing, as far as I'm concerned. So again, it's picking data which is meaningful and actionable, and it's actually going to change what you're doing. A lot of the time people overcomplicate things. I think it's a bit like like that quote, probably a bit controversial for the podcast, that quote about, teenage sex. Everybody, sort of talks about it. Nobody really knows, necessarily how to do it, and everyone just does it because they think everyone else, or everyone else thinks everyone else is doing it. So everyone claims that they sort of do it. So people get these force plates and they sort of implement it in practice because they see someone else doing it. Well, they really don't think about the process and the application and what they're going to do with that data. They just do it, because everyone else is doing it.
Very cool. Yeah. No, great. That when you talk about single leg, that's something which we mentioned. We mentioned quite a few times again in the tendinopathy series, the importance of doing that. But that leads us nicely to another one of the products which is on the website, which is the HopMat, which obviously you are looking at single leg assessment. So this photo doesn't do it justice, but tell us what the HopMat's all about.
Yeah, so it's a 6 meter long mat, initially created to assess the limb symmetry index. So battery of tests, including the single leg hop, the triple leg hop for distance, the crossover hop, and the 6 meter timed hop. But there's a number of other different sort of hop and power based assessments. So the big difference of this is you obviously require a bit more space, and it's getting down towards that end phase, towards that return to sport, often with the people you're using this with. And, often, lower limb injuries, things like, those ankle sprains and ACLs and those types of things you typically use it with, or, nice screens for, and baseline data setting in pre-season for a lot of your athletes at the sports clubs and stuff too. So it gives you some nice data that you can track over time. But again,
great simple idea. Well, is it something you just sort of like, just sitting down and suddenly thought, what, imagine just a nice length of reliable hopping test where we can actually measure this each time and reproduce it? How did it come into your mind? And was there not something already out there?
Yeah, no, so at the time there was nothing out there like the mat, the MegaMat or the HopMat. Yeah. And for me, it was just, I was mostly, putting tape on the ground or pulling a tape measure out each time.
Cones or something,
And it just took a long time. And then it's like going out and working with those sports teams, it was really difficult to be able to do that. And for me, I want to assess people not only in the perfect environment in the clinic, when they're fresh, but I also want to assess them, when they've been out at sports training, where, they've been running around for an hour and a half and they're fatigued in their football boots on the grass surface with some of these assessments as well. So again, trying to bridge that gap and take people back further, for return to sport, or as part of the screening sort of process as well, to make it more specific to the individuals. And so, look, while you look at the research and the evidence, and they'll say, look, Steve, there's no evidence for that. All the research is done in this specific environment, typically like a basketball court or something like that for these types of tests. I'm thinking, what does this individual need to achieve their goals, and how can we make it more specific, in regards to the environment that we're performing it in, the footwear they're performing it in, the fatigue state, that they're performing it in as well. Because we see a lot of research, and, a big thing and reason why I think we see a lot of re-injuries is a lot of the time we do assess people when they're fresh, but there's lots of research showing that, there's a really nice study with 19 ACL individuals who all meet return to sport criteria for both their power-based testing and strength-based testing. When they actually go through a really simple fatigue protocol, 60% of them actually fail those cutoff points for return to sport. So I think it's another thing that we can do a little bit better in practice, is thinking about how we can reproduce the demands of what they need to achieve their goal, whether it is sport or that occupational task of someone who's getting back pain lifting in the factory or something. How can we get those demands so we can actually get some more information about what's meaningful to them, not just what the evidence says. And that's bringing science into practice and trying to put that research, I guess, to that specific individual that you're working with.
Very nice. Yeah, makes total sense. And again, it ties in nicely with what John was saying last week, in the sense that he said, like, I think he finished off asking therapists, just saying, look, next time you're kind of assessing someone, just drop all of the tests and stuff you've learned previously and just think, right, what do I need to do to get this person to see? What would I, if I knew nothing about all these other tests, what would I get them to do which would replicate what they're doing in the sport or something? And there's your test. And that's probably a lot more reliable and functional, to use the word, than some of the other things which sit down in there and, like you say, push your leg against my arm and see if that hurts or not. So it's, or getting them to get on the couch when really they could do all of this on the floor, standing up or sitting down or so. Yeah, good stuff.
Genius. Also, love it.
I can't help thinking as well, I think it's something that's worth saying, that this talking about context, I mean, if you are running a business and you've got people coming in, and it depends, some people like the spit and sawdust and I'll just get a chalk line on the floor and mark it off. And that is, if you've got that market, you're probably better off doing that than having some kind of like posh stuff. But if you are trying to produce a clinic or a workspace of some form, which does look a bit more pucker and a bit more kind of like impressive, and that's going to sell, then this stuff does look cool as well. I mean, rather than just getting cones out or tape, you know, clients do feel looked after, and therefore you get that buy-in, that compliance, which is all an important part of it with this gear, I guess.
Look, 100%. I think that, it's probably the success of, my practice. I think when we launched it, I think we went from 0 patients to 150 patients per week in the space of 4 months. And so, it was about trying to, stand out and differentiate yourself, but also going above and beyond, I guess, what other people are doing. I think that spreads messages, and, we've tried to continue that with, development of Measures app and stuff now, where patients actually, all their data automatically syncs to the patient app. So as soon as you finish your assessment, they've got something there. They then take that away. It's all, their phone's always in the pocket, and they say, "Oh, look, I went to see the sports therapist, went and saw the physio earlier today. Check out these results." And that sort of can become perpetuating as well in regards to sort of referrals and that type of thing. The other great thing about, is data and incorporating technology and this type of stuff is people can't go down the road or to the clinic next door and get the same level of service and care, or have them collect the same data off them because they're not bringing this stuff in. And so once people do start to, collect this data, they realize how much, guesswork there is, and how much, potentially they're missing in other people they've seen before. So from a business point of view, it's, really successful. And, I work with a number of different businesses in helping them implement this stuff and bring technology in, not only in regards to this type of technology, but things like, how you can bring sort of, video communication in and stuff too. Try and, even before someone walks in the door, to get a great outcome. One of my sort of, big secrets, I guess, in clinical practice is, before someone comes in, I already want them to know, like, and trust me a little bit. So that starts from, your social media and your marketing there, obviously from your website. But as soon as they book on the website, they'll then get like a video explaining the process of the clinic and how it differentiates. And then at 24 hours later, or 24 hours before they come in, I'll send them a little personalized video message explaining, introducing myself a little bit to them. They've already filled in their new patient details remotely by then, so I can talk a little bit specifically about what they're coming in for. And then ask them to, if they've got any questions or anything before they come in. And so rather than, as a new grad, I'd come out as, as an osteopathic grad and, "Hi, Mr. Smith, are you here?" Already I know exactly what they're coming in with because I've got all the information before they come in. They already know exactly what I'm going to do because they've seen the sort of process, what's involved there. And they already, hopefully know, like and trust me a little bit because they've already had some sort of interaction with me as well. And so, for me, technology can really revolutionize. And as I said, for me, assessment starts before someone actually walks into the practice. If your assessments only start after you're taking your subjective history, you've missed the mark a little bit, in my opinion.
Good point. Love it. Very good. Right, look, time is beating us. So what I'm interested is, if people are listening to this, imagine someone now clicks and goes to matassessment.com. What should they be looking for on your website, including details of courses, of like you said, there's a few videos on there they can already get their teeth into. But yeah, where would you guide people to look at?
Yeah, look, we've got a sort of a free resources section on the top of the website. I think that's a great place to start. We've got lots of different webinars that we've done over the years, some sort of podcasts in there, some different PDF downloads and infographics and things. So there's, probably 15 plus hours of free resources on there that you can start to go and get your teeth into to learn a little bit more, I guess, about what we're about and how you can bring more data into practice. And look, going into a lot of those, you'll probably learn 20 or 30, new assessments at least, probably more, that you can start to bring into your practice, both physically or if you're doing, remote consultations like you do, Matt. We've also got some specific things about how you can bring more data into some of those remote sessions. So that's great. Also got our new Measures app, which is, as I said, there's 800 different tests in there now, around 22 different capacities. So you can literally pull your smart device out at the start of your assessment. You can actually use voice to text and do all your notes in there too. But you can go through, you can perform all the different assessments, set up your own templates. And as soon as you're finished, your notes are done, all your data's in there from all your different assessments, and you're on to your next patient or client. So you literally never have to write notes again. So that's what I'd recommend going there. In each test in the app, there's a little information button which links to a page with a description of how to perform the test, a video on most of it. Look, I haven't recorded all 800 yet, but I'm working on it, as well as some of the research about it as well. So there's probably 500 different tests where you can learn the protocol, you can watch the video, you can see the the data that we have to date there. So there's heaps of free resources if you download the app and start to work there, as well as lots of cool tools, like things like just simple tools again, inclinometers, AI video analysis, so you can perform all your video analysis in there. And if you don't even need a mat now, you've literally got a mat in your pocket with your augmented reality measuring. So literally you can sort of pull out your phone, you measure 2 points on the ground, and you actually perform things like the star excursion balance test without the mat, or those hop tests without the HopMat. So, probably putting myself out of business a little bit there, but, for me, I prefer people to have this stuff accessible, and hopefully, change practice and bringing people into the 21st century.
Very cool. No, it is a little landmine. People watch out. You will get lost in there if you start looking. And I do it again, admire and thank you for the heaps of free stuff that's on there as well for people to learn and get to know you. So it's, definitely worth checking out. And then if you are interested in courses, there's also is there a membership or a private or something there? What's that?
And I've got some online courses. We've also got a user group, which anyone can join for free as well. That's where we'll often share some of the latest research and stuff too. So, we've got a Facebook group as well as a community on the back end for the Measures app, where people can go in there and ask questions about different assessments and stuff too. So we try and provide lots of resources. So we got on this because we wanted to, try and improve the industry, and and we learn as much from you guys out there as well. So it's that's the best part of my job, I think.
Very cool. That's great. Okay, well, look, people, we will make sure that all these links go into the notes. On Instagram, it's Mat Assessment. And then on Facebook, if you look up Mat Assessment as well, you'll find it. But we will put direct links to that in the show notes on the podcast and all popular podcast apps. And like I say, matassessment.com for the website, which will have links to all of these places as well. Amazing. Right. We're there 10 o'clock, or should I say 7 o'clock in the morning in Melbourne. You've made it to 7 o'clock. That's right. Thanks, people, for joining us. Stephen King, thank you so much. I'm looking forward to listening back to this myself. Some real gems of advice and information in there. People who have joined us in the live lounge, thank you very much. We're a bit quiet tonight for questions, but again, that's probably because you're writing things down and checking out the website and stuff like that. Next week, if you are listening to this podcast and you like the idea of joining live and being able to ask questions directly to our guests next week, we are going to be joined by Jane Wigg of the Lymphedema Training Academy. And it's going to be about lymphedema management for manual therapists. Really honoured and lucky to have Jane Wigg in here from the Lymphedema Training Academy. Very special guest and very respected around the world. So it's going to be a really useful episode, particularly, I would say, for manual therapists, massage therapists, for this tricky and often misinformed area. So if you would like to join us live for that and ask questions to Jane directly, then do come along. It will be back at 8 o'clock because we're not having another Australian on. That'd be way too much. We're already up to our quota of about 4 in a month. So normal time, 8 o'clock in the evening if you'd like to. If you can't, that's fine. Just continue listening to the podcast. I mean, it's getting more popular. It's lovely. There was a bit of a lull and now it's picking up again, which is great to see. But do please leave a little review. 5 would be great. If you're stuck on the number of stars, just put 5. That'd be fantastic. It just helps a good word get out to more people out there, which is what it's all about. So thank you very much. That just leaves me to say once again, thank you, Stephen, for joining us. Stephen King.
Thank you very much, Matt, and the Sports Therapy Association, the team, Gary and Scott, for getting me on here. It's been a pleasure. Excellent, and hopefully we'll have a part 2, maybe to talk about the gait analysis stuff on there. That'll take a whole hour. Exciting. Great. Thanks, dude. We'll see you soon. And people, if you hopefully I'll see some of you again in the live lounge next Tuesday at 8 o'clock. Take care.